Work was a serious disruption in my life. What I mean by that is whenever I graduated from college and moved into the city, into a new professional work environment, I found that I had not been prepared for what I was going to be facing. I had been actively involved in different work environments in college. I had worked part-time jobs, some of them very rigorous in the oil field, but what I found when I started working in a full-time capacity, I really wasn't prepared emotionally, spiritually, or even physically for the rigors of work. One of the things that I had learned whenever I moved into the city was that I had a lot of spiritual ambitions in my life. Matter of fact, my wife and I were planning on working for a few years and then going into the mission field. What I soon discovered, though, was that I really had some growing up to do when it came to my theology of work. When you look at statistics, only about 3 people in 10 experience any kind of fulfillment or purposeful engagement in what they do in work. In our city, we have about a city of 1 million people that get up every day and go to work. And just think about that. Only about 3 in 10 find their work purposeful or meaningful in what they do. And that doesn't even mean that those people are even pursuing godly purposes. They may be finding purpose in work for other reasons. So how can we find purpose in work? What is it like for you? Is it just a paycheck? That's how often I felt. I felt like I would just get up, go to work, spend the week there, and then head off to church maybe for the weekend, and find little correlation between what I did on Sunday and what I did on Monday. It was easy for me to connect with God in the worship experience, but whenever I stepped into the workplace, it was a different arena. There was projects to do, deadlines to fulfill, things that were very pressing, and I found it very hard to integrate my faith in my work. So a couple observations that I've learned from this experience is one, is that the way I view work is a reflection of my theology. The way I view work is a real reflection of how I view God and the way I think about His work in my life. The second observation is that work is good. I realize that work is God's gift to us, that He meant it for our good. And just like marriage or parenting or other things that God has given to us, is that work is hard, but work is good. Let's look at the first chapter of Genesis and we'll get a better picture of this. In Genesis 1:1, it says, God created the heavens and the earth. The very first image that we have of God is of Him working. The very first image, God works. He still works today. Jesus says, my Father is working and I'm still working. And doing the will of Him who sent me is my work. So Jesus was actively working as well. As God then created the world, the environment that we now enjoy, 5 times in the book of Genesis 1, He says it is good. He would stop and look at His work and say it's good. And then when He finished all His work, He said it is very good. So God was willing to get His hands dirty, in a sense, in the very nature of what we all encounter in everyday life of creation. He meant it for our good. And God has wired into us, all of us, an inherent DNA that we need work. It's a part of our nature. What often gets me excited sometimes is when I go maybe to a movie theater or some other venue and I'll see someone who maybe has some challenges in their life. Maybe they have some disabilities that they encounter. And yet it's exciting to see them engaged in something meaningful that gives them dignity. And perhaps you've been in situations where you've seen someone who stopped working for a period of time, such as retirement. And it's not uncommon for those people to just kind of waste away because God designed us for work. It's a very much part of our DNA. So how do we experience purpose in work? How can we connect with that? Well, it's a challenge. Matter of fact, it's a problem. In our current society, especially in our Western civilization, there is this attitude of almost secularization of work and worship, is that we connect with God with what we do on Sunday, but when we walk into the workplace at a manufacturing plant or a restaurant, or in my case, a real estate office, oftentimes we have a hard time connecting with where God is in the midst of all the tasks and responsibilities that we encounter. We have a very fast-paced society. Our Western civilization is not friendly to the idea of connecting faith in our work. It's like this gap we have. We have our faith on one side, and then we have worship and experience of God on the other, and it's hard for those two to become connected. Matter of fact, I feel like that the home is the most challenging place for us to connect our faith and our work, but our workplace is the most difficult. It's very challenging. We have very few role models in this arena. In John 10:10, Jesus said, "The thief comes to steal and slaughter and destroy, but I came that you might have life and have it to the full." God desires for our work experience just to be as robust and abundant in how we experience Him as any other arena of life. And yet we have an enemy that's there to steal and kill and destroy that which God made as good. And so there's usually two responses I've seen in the workplace, is that in one response we typically will just disconnect. We have no connection with God at all in our work. And then the other case, we have a situation where we become engrossed in our work and our work becomes God itself. We try to find some sort of meaning and purpose in that which can't give meaning and purpose to it. Only when God is involved does our work find purpose and meaningful to it. We saw this in the scriptures in a couple stories. One is in the story of Jacob. Jacob went to work for his uncle Laban, and part of his dowry to marry Laban's daughter was to work for him. Well, work became difficult, and Jacob basically just fled. He disconnected from applying anything biblical in terms of how he would pursue his work and fled Laban's presence. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have Saul. Saul became so engrossed in his work. Whenever he became threatened that David would eventually become king, he pursued his work with vigor. His work became his idol, and thus became idolatry. So how can we deal with these two problem issues of either completely disconnecting or making work a God for us? Well, there's two purposes that have personally helped me in terms of how I look at work. One of them is to look at work as God's instrumental value for the advancement of humankind. In other words, it's a cultural mandate that He's given us in order to advance the human race. In Genesis 2:15, after God put Adam and Eve in the garden, He gave this command to them. And this is the first command that He gave concerning work. He said He put them in the garden to care and to cultivate it. To care and to cultivate. And think about this for a minute. Here, Adam and Eve are in a perfect environment. And yet God wanted them to make it better. He left it up to them to take care of it. Was it because He wasn't able? Certainly not. God was able to take care of that which He created. But He allowed us as human beings to have a part of His desire to see the advancement of human flourishing, which brings glory to Himself, to care and to cultivate. And so they were to care for the garden. They were to cultivate the garden. And what that means for us in our modern society is just think about all the conveniences that we have today, from paper to air conditioning to homes to cars to vehicles to plastics. All these things that we enjoy is that someone took the time to cultivate that which God had already given. He only did that for mankind. He didn't do that for the animal world. A lion is still a lion, a tiger is still a tiger. But when it comes to the human flourishing, God desires for us to care and to cultivate that which He started. And so we have the blessing of that. So everything that you and I do in our work can be traced back to one of those two facets of work. So if you're a nurse, you're caring for people. If you're a psychologist, you're caring for people. If you're a repairman, you're repairing for people. If you're a car mechanic, you're taking care of things. If you're in the cultivation business of making something better, you're manufacturing a product. Those are all the ways that we experience God's purpose in what we do by caring and cultivating what we have available to us. I found this particularly meaningful for me. I was in the commercial real estate development business when I started working. And in our industry, we would go out and we would find a barren piece of land that was desolate. It had nothing to offer in and of itself. And so we would buy the property. We would get together with architects and planners and design a property that we then could build, have contractors to build it, and eventually move people into that property that would house businesses where they could, again, serve their customers. And so in that kind of environment, I realized that God was the very first real estate developer. He took that which was barren and void, and He made it something useful. He took that which was desolate, and it made it better. And so everything that you and I do in our work, we can trace back to the instrumental value that it brings to humankind. And that brings glory to God. Even if we're not a believer, He finds glory in that. But what about for us who are believers? Well, work provides for us a purpose of intrinsic value. What I mean by that is intrinsic means something that's within us. Is that God allows us to image Him as a worker. It allows us, just like I said, that when I realized that I was imitating what God did as a real estate developer, is that I then bear His image. And there's three ways that we bear His image in what we do. One is in what we do, or vocation. Vocation actually comes from the word vocare, which means calling. And so our vocational and what we do actually can bring glory to God because we're His image bearers. And so if someone's a teacher, they image God teaching. If they're a doctor, they image God as a healer. So whatever our capacities are in our work, we can make those connections with what we do. So how can we make this practical in terms of our daily life? Well, here's a few ideas that have helped me. One is to seek to connect with Him in our work, is to find that purpose, is to take time, perhaps at the beginning of my day, just to pray and ask God to help me in my work. Another thing I do is I just lay my Bible out on the desk next to me, and at different times in the day I can just do spot checks. Or I may just take a walk for 30 to 45 seconds around the office. There's ways that we can meaningfully connect with God in terms of what we do. David said, I've set the Lord continually before me. And so that is the attitude that we can have in our work. Another way is to consecrate, is to turn over our work to God, especially when we're facing business decisions or job changes, is to turn it over to Him, is that we get to become a living sacrifice, a living offering of worship to Him. This is what it means in Romans 12:1 when it says, I urge you therefore that by the mercies of God to present your bodies as a living sacrifice. When we work, we are a living sacrifice to the glory of God in what we do. And so that everything we do is a part of our spiritual worship. Nothing has become secularized, so we consecrate everything to Him. And finally, we can experience ourselves as being commissioned in our work. And being commissioned is being His ambassadors and His representatives in the workplace. 2 Corinthians 5:20 says, we are therefore His ambassadors, as though God were making His entreaty through us. So we get a chance to help be reconcilers of people to God in their work. So as we think back in terms of our purpose for work, one, work is good. Work is a way that we can connect with God. It's the largest part of our daily lives, and so it is not to be secularized in terms of how we work and live. We can find instrumental value in what we do. We can find intrinsic value in what we do. And we can connect, consecrate, and be commissioned by Him in terms of what we do in our everyday work. God bless you.